Welcome to STK Essentials Training, led by myself, Grace Halferty. I'm an Aerospace Engineer at LSAS-Tec. Even though this training is pre-recorded, we're excited to have you join us virtually as we delve into the world of STK. Throughout this training, you'll dive into some core principles and essential techniques that will empower you to navigate STK with confidence and skill. During our time together, you'll learn the basics of STK navigation, scenario creation and management, object manipulation, data visualization, and scenario analysis. If you're eager to join us, please reach out to LSAS at support@lsastech.com to secure your spot in one of our upcoming training sessions. Thank you.
So first we're gonna open up STK, or mine's already open. So does everyone see a page kind of like this? Have your pop-up that says welcome to STK. So we have a few different options here, which are
which configuration should we open? Professional,
or enterprise.
You can open the premium space option.
I think enterprise is good.
Enterprise?
You get everything.
Okay, yeah. If it gives you the option to do enterprise, then do enterprise. But make sure you have at least premium space. Installed. Okay, so once you're here, we have a few options, which is create a scenario, open a scenario, our training and tutorials, and help. So training and tutorials, if you click on that, that's going to take you to the pages that Drew mentioned, where we have a complete list of tutorials and training. So we have different certifications for STK, where you get different certificates, and it's really good for your resume. So there's level 1 training, and then level 2, and level 3, which is Grandmaster. And sometimes they give you like little prizes and stuff, so that's kind of interesting. Even if you don't get STK certified, there's a bunch of different tutorials that are really useful, different capabilities, and learning how to integrate STK with like MATLAB or Python. So that's really helpful. This help tab, again, just takes you to more like general help things, so that's always good to remember to use. And if you don't find the specific thing that you're looking for on this page, you can always like email AGI support and they can help you out. Or you can email us too. So we have a few options here, create a scenario or open a scenario. So if I went on open a scenario, I could open one of my saved files here, but we're gonna go ahead and click create a scenario, and this should pop up. So what a scenario file is it's like a comprehensive file with all of our data and objects that we create in our STK scenario. So that's just going to make it really easy to share files between people and ensure that you have all of those objects that you created and that you're going to get those same results for your analysis. So it's a really nice way to easily share between groups of people and collaborate, and also ensure that you have all of those same defined objects. So here we're going to give our scenario a meaningful name. So you don't want to have like scenario 1 through 100, because it's going to be really hard to find the specific mission that you're looking for. So you can name it, I almost named it STK Fundamentals. You can name it whatever you want. I'm going to name mine STK Fundamentals, but make sure you give it something somewhat meaningful to what you're working on. And here in the description, you can add whatever you want. Again, this is helpful for like larger missions when you have a bunch of transfers, say, or like a ton of flybys and you want to know more about your scenario. So you can add whatever you want there, and again, you can save this wherever you want as well. So you can put the name different or the description different, however you like. But for the start and stop time, so this is our scenario start and stop time for our analysis. And if we go here, there's a couple of different shortcuts. So we have start time set to today, set to tomorrow. So that's really easy to just click. We can also change our units. So if you want to do like Julian date, you can do that. We're going to stick with UTCG, which is kind of like the basic time zone that time zone, like most time zones are based off of universal coordinated time. So we're just going to leave that. I'm going to click set to today to make sure that matches mine. And then for our stop time, a really handy trick is like if you want a year from now, but you don't want to do like all that math, you can just do plus 1 year, and that works for like different time units. So like you could do plus 1 day, plus 1 hour, etc. So we're just going to do today and plus 1 year, and then finally we can do a change to our central body. So we have all of these options already. We're just gonna stick with Earth, keep it simple.
I don't have a central body pop-up.
You don't have a central body pop-up?
No,
Okay. Gonna figure that out.
sounds like a personal problem there.
I have a doctor's appointment, I'm new
You
to
don't
that.
have it?
It's gotta be a default.
When you don't create scenario, but you can. I can cancel track.
No, it's usually, it's gotta be one of the defaults.
Convenience preferences. Worst case scenario, we can just worst case
The
scenario.
default is Earth.
Yeah, worst case
Yeah, this is
scenario,
the
let's
worst
just
case
click okay.
scenario.
We'll go with Earth.
Accident.
But it automatically is Earth, so you don't have to worry about it for this, but this is a preference that you can set. So if you did want to put your central body for the moon, you would just have to find that preference, which we can show you guys if you're interested.
Scenario object in your object browser, once you create a scenario, and very probably can change the primary central body.
Gotcha.
And that's probably just like Drew said, preference.
Just the default are accepted.
Yes, for example, in the default, when you insert an object for the first time you're using STK, they don't show all the available objects, and you have to create the preferences to see them.
Right. Like if you're doing a mission to Jupiter, you want to just keep coming up with Earth.
Yeah.
Exactly, so that's a default. And there's also a process for setting a default scenario, in file set as default scenario. So if you have a scenario where the central body is Jupiter and you have these satellites that you're always going to be using or these ground stations, you just set that as a default scenario. Every time you create a scenario, that will pop up.
Okay, so you should have a page that looks like this, and we're gonna close this as insert STK objects window first a little bit, just to kind of gain familiarity with how STK looks. So we have our toolbar up here with a bunch of different options, and then we have our main 3D graphics and 2D graphics window as well. So you can kind of play around with these. You can like click and drag them, resize them however, but kind of just for a basic aesthetic look, I like to do tile vertically. So window, tile vertically. Then we get like the same size next to each other. Looks pretty nice. We have a bunch of different options inside the 3D graphics window. So if I put this hand symbol, I could grab the globe and kind of drag around. There's also zooming in, so I can zoom into a particular region. If we create a really cool like satellite picture and you want to take a picture really quick and save it, you can click snap frame. And you can save as a variety of different image extensions. This is also a pretty cool feature where you can view from another central body. So say I want to look at the Earth from the moon. So I click from position moon to position Earth, click apply. So then I can look at that. And then reset that back. If you ever are like zooming around, dragging around, and you're just like completely lost in space and you're like, where did Earth go? You can press this home view button, which is the eye with the little house, and bring you back to that original view. So that's pretty handy. We also have things like orient from top, which is a nice way to look at some orbit paths in a more centralized view. This flashlight can help eliminate some areas better that were previously covered in shadow. If you want to kind of annotate your scenario in like an image or something, you can use like this pen and draw, point things out. And then we can also change our central body from this view as well. So you can see all the different interesting things. So go back to Earth. And then in our 2D graphics window, we can do similar things. Something I like to point out that's kind of useful is this measure tool. So click on the ruler, and you can kind of just drag a line from two different points. And in the bottom left of your screen, you'll see the distance. You can also like just move around on the map, and it'll show you the coordinates on the bottom too of where you're pointed. So before we do anything further, we want to save our scenario file. So click File, Save As, save it somewhere. I recommend saving pretty often just because these can be large files and you don't want to lose all of your progress. So that's just a good handy tip to remember. I'm gonna show you how to look at the global properties of the scenario. So if we go to the left, we have our object browser, which is where all of our objects are going to populate when we add them into our scenario. This is just our basic scenario object. So there's two ways you can edit the properties. You can just double click on it, or you can right click and hit the yellow notepad, which says properties. So here we have some of our basic scenario things that we set up at the beginning, like our central body and our start and stop time. You can change these if you want. You can also change the units that you're using in your scenario. And you can also change the global attributes of your 3D graphics and your 2D graphics, like showing labels or the trajectories of the orbits. So if you want to like do it all at once, this is a good way to do that. Okay, so now we're going to make our scenario a little bit more interesting, but before that, does anyone have any questions? Okay. So we're going to go ahead and click Insert at the top and New. And you should have a bunch of different scenario object types. If you're missing some of them and they look different than mine, that's just because in Edit Preferences, you might not have all of these objects selected. Don't worry about like adding all of them, just if one's missing, that is the reason, is because they're not all selected from there. So we're gonna go ahead and insert a basic satellite. So we're gonna click on satellite, and then on the right side for our method, we're gonna click insert default. And on the left, we're populated with our satellite right here. And here we can change a variety of different things about our satellite, such as the propagator. We're just going to leave it as 2-body, but as you can see, you can do like perturbations like J2 or J4, a bunch of different stuff. We can also change a bunch of different things about the way it looks on our 3D graphics, and then also change constraints. So this satellite, this way is a little bit more like complicated to insert a satellite. So I recommend, if you want to just do a basic satellite, is add it through the orbit wizard. So we're going to go to satellite, and then our method will be orbit wizard. And we're going to click on insert. So here we can define our satellite based on a particular orbit type. So if you click on type, we have all of these different orbit types. Like Molniya, SunSync, whatever you want to do. Let's just leave it at circular to do a really basic one. So STK is going to name objects like whatever it's called, starting 1 through whatever. So if you don't want that to like confuse you and you want to make sure that you know what you're doing, just you can change it to whatever you want. I'm just going to change it to my satellite, which isn't very descriptive, but so we can change the color here as well. Got a bunch of different colors. We can also change the model of our satellite by clicking this ellipses. And there's a whole bunch of models that are downloaded when you install STK for you. If you also had your own model, say you had like a CubeSat that you designed in your lab, and you want to model that CubeSat specifically, you can also input a model file that way.
Where was that SunSync thing?
In orbit type,
Oh, there it is.
SunSync, the bottom one, yeah. There's also repeating SunSync.
Oh, blind.
And then we can define based on some basic orbital elements, to say I really wanted to be super inclined to the satellite. And then I press enter or OK, and we see our satellite. This is the animation toolbar. So here we have a few different options. Pause, increase time step, decrease. So some important ones to note are this red back button is the reset button. So say we kind of let this go for like a while and we want to go back to the original time of the start time of our scenario, just press that and it will stop at that point. We also have real-time animation mode, so it's going to go really slow, but if you want to see how the satellite is moving in real time, that's an interesting thing to do. I also like to show the ability to zoom in to the satellite. So if you right click on it and click zoom to, there we can see the specific model that we had chosen. If I go back into properties and 3D graphics model, I can show or not show that. And by the way, when you're doing property changes, it's helpful to kind of slide it to like the right or left of wherever you're working. And then when you click apply, it will show that change in real time before you like close out of the properties window. So you don't have to like completely open things back up and close it again. But if I show that again, I can just change the look of it, say like this one. So that's a really cool thing to do to make some cool graphics. Another interesting way to add a satellite is through our standard object database. So again, we're going to insert satellite and then selecting our standard object database method. And here we can type the name of particular known satellites and add them to our scenario. So say I wanted to add some Starlink satellites. So I'm going to type Starlink in our name. If we knew the particular like ID of the object too, we could put that in. Another really useful thing is that you can search by particular attributes. So say I wanted to only search inclined satellites between 30 degrees and 80 degrees. I can put that as my constraints. You can also search by different operational statuses, like I want to look at only inactive satellites. And you can also search by an object extension. So satellites that have a receiver or like an imaging sensor. So if you don't really know the particular name of a satellite that you want, but you kind of want to generally look at a ton of satellites with sensors, you can do that. So we can select any of these Starlinks and add them into our scenario. I'm going to select like the first 5. And we can change the color, and this will apply the color to all of them. And the cool thing we can do is click Create Constellation from Selected. And give that a name. So I'm just going to name it Starlinks. And then click Insert. We're going to download then all of those objects from the database and put them into our scenario. So it's going to take a little second.
Database here is the AGI data fed,
Yes.
right?
Yes. So we can take data from a couple different sources. So here I have online and local checked. So that's going to search both what I have locally downloaded and then also, since I'm connected to internet, it will pull from online. This column right here that says data source is showing where the Starlink information is coming from. And right now it's the AGI standard object data service. So since we inserted all of those Starlinks, we can click close. And a really cool thing is that it's created a whole constellation object, which has those Starlinks all attached to them. So that's really useful if you're doing like a huge analysis of a ton of different satellites at once. Instead of just adding a bunch of satellites separately, this is a really quick way to do that. Another interesting thing is that you can load from like ephemeris files that you have or a TLE file. So if you have those and you want to like add those into your scenario, you can do that. You can also upload known things like a GPS constellation. So if I click load GPS constellation, I just like this one because it kind of looks cool. Sometimes it takes a little bit to think. Okay, so then you're like, oh my gosh, there's so many. And it's a little bit overwhelming. But if you zoom out, it's pretty cool for visualization. A tip, if you're like, I don't really like how all of the multicolored looks, I can't really tell like what satellites those are, they kind of seem irrelevant. If I click on the first GPS in that list, and I shift click, select all of them, and I go over to the left to change the color. square. I had to double click on it, and then I can change it all to whatever color I want. Probably should not chosen blue, but yeah, so that's a cool way to change everything at once, easier, so you don't have to like individually click on every single one and change it. Okay, another way you can use that function is to hide all of those satellites. So you're like, oh, I don't want all of these satellites in the way when I'm trying to do something else. So shift click and then uncheck all of them. Also gonna hide my first satellite. Okay. Okay, so that's kind of the basics of satellites. Does anyone have questions on that? Okay. So next we're going to look at a different type of object. This object kind of has similar properties to other objects. So this object is the aircraft object, and it's kind of similar to ships and ground vehicles and how it's defined. So for the purpose of time, I'm just going to show the aircraft. I'm going to click Insert Default Aircraft. Then we have Aircraft 1. You can name it whatever you like. So here we have a few different propagators, which the ground vehicle is going to use like a similar propagator. We're going to use this great arc propagator. And the great arc propagator it just defines the route by like a point-by-point method, and it kind of just connects like the waypoints through this propagator, this arc propagator, and that's through like the turn radius. So there's a few different ways we can define some points for this aircraft. A cool one is just you can click on the 2D graphics window and just kind of make your path, and it'll populate this table with those points. So if you want just like a rough idea, or like this, if you zoom in really far and you know like the specific point that you want, you can do that. Something I like to change is this altitude reference to MSL, which means mean sea level. I think it's just a lot easier to understand because that's how we're going to reference our altitude, and for me that's just easier for my brain to visualize. I'm actually going to delete all of these points, and I'm going to type in a few set points. So just insert 3 points, and then we're going to change our values here. So for the first one, it'll be 38 degrees latitude, and then minus 120 longitude, and then 30 lat, minus 99 long, 40, and then minus 77. Okay, so that's going to put those 3 points. It's kind of like a V-shaped path. Something that I think is pretty useful is this set all option. So we can set our specific parameters, and it'll change that for all of the values in the table. So it's really useful to like hard code all of that. I'm going to set it to 45,000 feet. I'm going to set my speed to 450. Okay, so this is like another way to see the units. So if you click the little ruler, you can change the units for this, and then turn radius. Something to note is if I put this as like 10,000 feet. If I click enter, it's going to automatically convert that to kilometers for me, so I don't need to do any of that math or converting. So I'm going to change that to. I did not want my speed to. change. We can also zoom to our aircraft and look at what that, well, okay. Okay, I think I did something. I don't know why he's not showing up. It's because I said something. But I think my units keep getting messed up. Okay, anyways, we can change the model similar to the the satellite model. So if we go into 3D model, we can show all of our different things. So I could select like business jet or whatever I want. Another thing we can do is when we do the great arc path, it's not going to have any banking on turns or like rolling of the aircraft. So if you want to add realism to that, we can do that by going to attitude and changing our basic type to coordinated turn. Just leave the time offset at 10 seconds. And that's just going to basically make sure that our aircraft has a banking effect when we go into our turn. I'm going to reset the Okay, I'm sorry. I need to fix that speed because it's not appearing in my scenario. So I'll fix that later, but for now, let's move on to another object, which is the area target. So we're going to go to Insert, New, Area Target. And this is a really useful tool, especially for analyzing things like perimeters of countries, like for defense reasons, or you want to take a particular picture of like terrain in an area. So this is a very good thing for like surveillance and sensors. So we can define area target for a few different things, which is select countries and US states, or by defining certain properties. So I'm going to click on select countries and US states. And I'm going to go to Florida, US. You can change the color of the graphics here too, or just click on auto select color. So insert here. And then as you can see, we can zoom into our area boundary. You can see here on the 2D graphics too, we have an outline of Florida. So this is a nice way to create some visual things for your scenario, especially to make it more clear where you're looking at, and then also it helps for defining certain things. Something you can do with STK Premium Air is you can set your aircraft path to a specific area. So I'm going to show you how we could make an area target for like a landing strip by defining a rectangle box over a known airstrip. So we're going to go to area target and select our method, and then click insert default. Go to the area target properties. sometimes the little window will get trapped down there, so just open it that way. And we have a bunch of different ways we can define this, or I guess it's just ellipse and pattern, but we can add a bunch of different points. So we're going to add 4 points here. And the values will be 38.4345 minus 105.116, 38.467, x 105.099, 38.4256 minus 105.1208, 58.4333, and then finally minus 105. Then we're going to click apply. So I'm just going to rename this to airstrip. Also, make sure to save your scenario. So we zoom into our airstrip. So we took it off, but I know it's okay. So we have our airstrip scenario or airstrip area target selected. So say we wanted to plan a mission to land at this particular area. This is how we would define that particular spot. So this is also really useful for things like coverage, which is a more advanced tool. That's how we can get data about how often a certain object is covering a certain time in our planet. So say we wanted to see how often would this plane fly over this particular rectangle, and could I get data from that? Like how long could I get data from that? So that's a really useful tool to use. Another thing is, another really useful object is our facility object. So a facility object is going to be like a ground station, or kind of like, it works similar to our other objects, which is place and target. They're kind of defined in similar ways. So say we had like an observatory or a ground station somewhere on the Earth. This is how we can define that. And then we can add things like sensors to that. So we could kind of mimic our telescope or our surveillance system. So we're going to go ahead and define our facility object. So we can do this again a couple of different ways, from like our data federate or from the standard object database. So if I click insert from the standard object database, similar to how I would insert for, say, the satellite, I could search by different things, like, oh, I want it above a certain altitude, because I have certain observing constraints that I want to work around. Or if I want it, you know, from a certain network, like Blue Origin, I could do that too. I'm going to go ahead and search for white sands. Okay, so we have a few different options. We have a bunch of different things. So they're all defined as different like locations because there's a bunch of different ground stations at White Sands. So you can pick whatever one you want. I'm going to pick just this first one. You can also similarly create like a constellation from your selected satellites, like we did from your selected facilities, like we did with our satellites. So that's something that's pretty useful to do if you want to gather them all up in like an object too. So we're going to click insert. And we can change the properties of our model again with different looks. So we have a couple of different ones here. So you want to like look around. You can apply that. One thing that's actually happening is if we go into our 3D graphics window, so we're actually taking real-time terrain data from the server since we're connected to Wi-Fi. And that's why we get kind of these mountains that are going to load in, and we have some like gradient to our map because we're using that terrain server. If you wanted to save like on processing, you could always turn that off, but it is very nice for creating nice visualizations for your scenario. So here we have our antenna for our, like the look of the antenna for our facility, but this isn't actually like an antenna. It's just kind of a place that we can attach our antenna to. So we're going to learn a little bit later how to do that specifically. But before we do that, I just want to point out a couple different tips and tricks of making your scenario look a little bit like more aesthetic if you're doing certain like missions. So one of the things you can do in the 3D graphics window is like show map details. And so you can shift click all of these different things. And then that kind of just gives you some more interesting look to your scenario. You can just undo that. If you want to show the long lines as well, like you're trying to show a particular area, how long the satellite covers that, it might be nice to have those as reference. Another thing I like to do is if I'm showing like a big transfer, like a Hohmann transfer between planets or something.
Sorry, how did you pull up the 3D graphics?
Yeah, so it's just going to be this little properties window right there. The yellow sticky note. Something that's pretty nice to do, I think, if the star background is kind of distracting from your orbit path, say I have like all of these satellites that I wanted to show, like all of these GPS satellites, and I'm like, oh, that star background is kind of confusing with like the dots and the marker. I like to just do like a white background, and then you can kind of see everything, and especially if you you can also add things like vectors. So if I want to just show the Earth Sun vector, you can define your own vectors too. Or even define your own planes and stuff. But something I like to add is like this space grid, because it's really nice to see like the equator and see how it's like the satellites are working with the kind of plane of the orbit. So I think it's really nice to demonstrate that, especially for more like orbital mechanics demonstrations. I'm just going to revert some stuff back to normal look. So change that and change back to black. We can also you can also just like show the equator this way too, or like other lines. And we can also enable things like label declutter. So that's going to add a more like just line towards our things instead of hovering over and crowding like our main central body. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and hide all of those GPS satellites again. And now I'm going to insert a sensor. So we're going to go to Insert, New. And first of all, we're going to insert a new facility that we're going to attach our sensor. So we're going to go to Insert Facility. I'm going to do Standard Object Database again. I'm going to type in KIPI. I'm going to do the first one. Change the color however you want. Insert. So here we have our kit peak, and I'm going to go ahead and hide our white space. So open up your properties window of kit peak. We have a few things we can define here. But we're not going to really worry about that right now because we're mainly going to be worried about our sensor that we add to our facility. So you can close that. We're going to click Insert New. And then we're going to go to Attached Objects Sensor. So all of these objects down here have to be attached to one of the objects that you see called scenario objects. So they don't really work on their own, and they work with the other objects that you have added, like their parent object. So we're going to click Insert Default. I'm going to go ahead and attach it to my kit peak. So what you get is a big cone as a default that shows where the sensor's field of view is. So maybe I have a telescope at this kit peak observatory, and I want to see how many satellites I could image at a certain time. Or throughout the year, how many observations could I get of a particular satellite. So I would go into my sensor and properties. So here we can change our sensor type. We have a few different ones, like EOIR Drew mentioned, where we can simulate pictures of the satellite. If I was really simulating kind of like a telescope, I would pick EOIR. But just for the sake of this intro tutorial, we're going to keep it really simple and use the simple conic. And we're going to keep that cone half angle. We're just going to change that to 30 degrees. Click Apply. Something that I think is really interesting is the constraints for the sensors. So if I'm modeling like a telescope and it has certain parameters, like, oh, it can only observe objects above a certain altitude or elevation rate because of the pointing angle of the telescope. We can use that. We can also have like sun constraints and lighting constraints. So those are really useful to really like model your scenario with fidelity. So we're going to go ahead and leave it as a very simple sensor for now. So that's kind of some of the basics of adding certain objects in STK, really useful objects. Of course, if you go to Insert New, we have a whole bunch of different ones that you can play around with, and I would recommend going through those help tutorials or the training tutorials for learning to add some of these other ones, especially like launch vehicles. But for now, I'm going to show a really useful tool that's used very commonly in STK, which is our access tool. So what access basically means is our line of sight to another object. So we have our sensor and we want to analyze basically the line of sight for other satellites. So I want to try to image some of these Starlink satellites that I need. So I'm going to go to this yellow and green like square with a line called access. And I want the access for my kit peak sensor, which I have right here. And I want to analyze all of these Starlinks that I added. So I'm going to shift click hold these 5 Starlinks. And we're going to click compute access for this. Okay, so our access has been computed for that. And one of the, sorry, I was thinking. So especially when you're analyzing a bunch of different objects, so say I was doing, especially the time duration of your scenario, so say I was looking like a 5-year period and I have like 300 satellites. Your processing time is going to take a little bit longer. Usually there's like a little bar on the right bottom corner that will tell you kind of like where it is in that process. So if it's ever pausing, it's usually not just frozen, it's just thinking. So try not to like mess with it too much. And just give it time to compute all of that data. So one of the things we can do now is look at our times through a variety of different forms. So down here, you can see in this timeline, kind of gives us like a calendar date of all the different times that we'll be able to see certain satellites. So that's just a nice little quick visualization for those access intervals. We can quickly access reports and graphs through here. So if I click on access reports, it comes up with this nice report that I can export to, I can save it as a text file or save it as a CSV to put into Excel or something like that, print it out. Change the units of your report up here. So each one will be a different like time unit. And then we can also ask for help too if we're confused about what the report means. So here we have little headings for each of our satellites. So they will be organized by the specific satellite. So down here would be our second one. And we can get some really nice results. Like we can see how many different times that the satellite or the sensor will see a particular satellite. It will show us our start time and our stop time, as well as how long it will be able to see that satellite. Then if we scroll down to the bottom of the particular object, we can see some statistics about that access as well. I'm going to go ahead and close that and open up our access graph. So here I kind of like looking at this because it's a nice little chart to see all of the different access times for the year. So it's very nice and easy to see when exactly the access will occur, and it's cool to see it against all of the other satellites as well. Something cool that you can do is go into a report and graph manager, click on that. And here is where we can get really custom with the type of reports and data that we can generate with STK. So you can click create a new report style and then name this report whatever you want. Name it my report. And basically what we can do is this window will pop up and we can add all of these different data providers to add content to our report. From then we can do a lot of, we can just gather a lot of different points of interest. Something that might be interesting is if we close this out, I'm going to click on the report and I'm going to go to the object type and change it to satellite. If I just clicked on a particular satellite, I can see all of the installed styles that I have and click on those, or like I showed before, you can make your own unique report. But like we could look at our J2000 and so that will give us some really nice values that's like interesting for orbital mechanics and analyzing specific positions of your bodies in your objects. So I find it really useful to look at that. So there's just a whole bunch of different styles we can do. Similarly, you can create your own graph style. So if you click this graph with the star on it to create a new graph style, this window will pop up. And we can just do so how you add the different contents to your report is through this button. So we're gonna click on whatever we wanted to add. So I wanted to add this body axis orientation, J2000, and then whatever you click on, and you press this right arrow, and that's what's going to be added onto your y-axis. So our x-axis will be time. If you change your graph type up here, you can change whatever you want to make it not just the time over y graph, but just for the sake of this, we can open it. And that's not really an interesting graph, but with that you can make really cool visualizations. This is like the right ascension of the ascending node graph over time, so we can see like the variation in the orbits and stuff like that. We can also do maybe one that's like eccentricity versus time, which shouldn't change really. So yeah, there's a bunch of different styles you can do. So does anyone have any questions about Access or the Report and Graph Manager? You can also do access between other objects. So say I wanted to do access of this airstrip with this aircraft. I could generate the access report there. Might take a while. Okay, well, there's nothing there. So our path obviously isn't going over the airstrip. If you wanted to see, oh, can this satellite survey that airstrip? You could do that as well. So when we do the access between a certain object, it's nice to like, for a sanity check, be like, oh, is this actually going to like give me any result before you like try to do the process of it? So I recommend kind of thinking about that before too. But yeah, that's kind of the basics of access. I'm going to quickly find the speed of the aircraft that I was trying to do because I wrote it down somewhere and I couldn't find it. Yeah. No problem. I spread this. Yeah. I told you. Is it? Yeah. Right. No, I'm literally like, I did it last night. Well, like mine just oh, Why is it not resending? Oh, normal animation mode. Okay, sorry guys. I accidentally was in real-time animation mode, so my plane was not showing up. So make sure you're in real-time animation mode and you should see your aircraft. Then you can, don't make it go that fast. Yeah, you should be able to see your aircraft and your pad now if it's in the normal animation mode. I'm also going to make the speed for this. Sorry, mine is very slow today. Sometimes the 3D graphics window will like freeze up on you, or at least this happens to me. So I like to close that. And then if you ever like accidentally close out one of your windows and you're like, where did that go? You can just go to view and do new 3D graphics window and get that back. Okay, so zoom to my aircraft, and then now it's going. So it's kind of hard to see in this like speed of animation, the banking of the turn, but if you slow down the animation a little bit, you can see it do the banking. So yeah, that's kind of all I have for basic STK. Kind of a lot to fit in an hour, so if at any point you're like, I don't know what she did, or I don't know why she did that, I recommend going to the STK level 1 trainings. Also, basically everything I covered in here, besides like 1 or 2 things, is enough to pass that certification. So I would recommend completing that certification if you have the time. Yeah, if you have any questions, you can ask them now, or if you think of any later, feel free to ask.
Thank you for joining us on this journey into STK Essentials training. We hope you found this training insightful and valuable. If you have any further questions or would like to explore more about STK, don't hesitate to reach out to LSAS at support@lsastec.com. Keep exploring, keep learning, and may your ventures into STK be filled with success. Thank you.